through our shared interests. And I am enthusiastic about our opportunities going forward. Okay, now next, I'm pleased to introduce the first keynote speaker of the day, FCC Commissioner Geoffrey Starks. Commissioner Starks was confirmed this past January, the newest commissioner of the FCC, and he and his staff have absolutely been a pleasure to work with, actually from the get-go. And he's had a long career of public and private sector experience. And Commissioner Starks has also shown leadership on key issues affecting CCA members, including the supply chain issue and improving the accuracy of the FCC's broadband coverage maps. So we need his help there. Staying close to his roots from Kansas, Commissioner Stark also has shown himself to be a champion of those issues necessary to closing the digital divide. So please, let's give a warm welcome to the newest FCC Commissioner, Commissioner Geoffrey Starks. Thank you so very much for coming. I'll get this out of your way.
Great.
Because I know you're going to give us some great information.
I'm looking forward to it. Well, thank you, everyone. I am Geoffrey Starks. I'm the newest commissioner, although not the first Kansan, of course. The chairman has me beat there. Ajit Pai is a Kansan, although we do discuss many things related to the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes. Patrick Mahomes. So thank you, Steve, of course, for the invitation, for being here today, and good afternoon to everyone. I know I'm catching you while you're eating. Excited to be here, excited to give you thoughts on a couple of things that are on my mind. The first thing I want to say is I am just absolutely delighted to be here, to hear how rural and regional carriers are helping to connect Americans across the country. And in fact, I just came from a meeting just moments ago, actually, with some of your members talking about some of the issues that they're facing here today. It's hard to believe that wireless service was once viewed as a luxury that only the wealthiest Americans could afford. And in fact, it wasn't that long ago that a lot of people just used their phone for emergencies. And over the last couple of decades, technological advances have changed wireless service from a pricey landline alternative to the connection of choice for more than half of our Americans. And in that time, wireless service has shifted for many folks from using exclusively voice service, of course, to one that is all about data. Whether it's using mapping applications, streaming content from many of the amazing apps that have debuted in the last few years, mobile wireless has revolutionized all of our lives. And the next generation of wireless service promises even more. That is, of course, 5G technology. Our lives are going to change. We're already hearing about the amazing things that will flow from fast speeds, higher capacity, lower latency, that is promised by 5G technology. Virtual and augmented reality, massive IoT systems, self-driving cars, the list goes on and on. But what's even more exciting, of course, is what we can't see around the corner, what is going to be unexpected. When 4G rolled out, not many folks had predicted, of course, that the rise of ride-sharing apps would disrupt the taxi cab industry. And we can expect similar surprises, of course, for 5G and the advanced wireless service that is going to be rolled out throughout the country. And it's important that all communities have the opportunity to benefit from these advancements. I cannot stress to you how much I believe in that. And I want to express my appreciation for the work performed by rural and regional carriers addressing the issue of the digital divide. I, of course, have started to change a little bit of the conversation around that by saying, when you're talking about persistent issues of who has and who has not, it has started to crystallize into something and harden into something that I think I'm talking about as an internet inequality. And many of you serve the most rural, the most remote parts of our country, and in some cases you are the only carrier there. So bringing broadband to all Americans is an essential part of my mission, and it's an essential part of your mission. You can see that the commitment is being done by CCA members, just to name a few, because I know everybody is doing tremendous work. I visited New Mexico last month and saw firsthand the difficulties experienced by many Native American populations on reservations and how hard it is to obtain high-quality broadband service. And in fact, nearly 80% of tribal members living in rural New Mexico can't access the internet from home. And so to help address this problem, CCA member NTUA Wireless, which is a Navajo-owned, carrier, partnered with a local school district to deploy a pilot program offering Wi-Fi connectivity on school buses. And many Native American kids in rural New Mexico now have long bus rides, of course, between home and their school. And students can use that time to better themselves and better their educational needs. Another major issue facing rural Americans is, of course, the lack of access to quality health care. The Department of Health and Human Services reports that 76 million Americans live in an area with a shortage of primary care providers. And that's why I was pleased to hear about C-Spire's partnership with the University of Mississippi. The pilot program allows for remote monitoring and insulin tests of diabetes patients, and the program has had amazing results in ensuring that patients take their medication as prescribed and show up for their examinations. It's also saved money. With just 100 patients over 6 months, the program has saved nearly $340,000. And experts estimate that a statewide program could save up to $200 million per year in hospital costs alone if it impacts even 20% of the diabetes patients statewide. Both of these programs sound exciting, promising, and I salute the hard work of the carriers in making them a success. As ever, I look forward to continuing to watch their progress. As these stories illustrate, high-quality, affordable broadband service is essential to ensuring full participation in our economy, our educational system, and yes, our democracy. That's why we should be doing everything possible to ensure that Americans receive the service they need. But while I'm laser focused on the future and ensuring that service is provided to all, I also believe it's critical not to neglect the security of our underlying networks. Every part of our nation's critical infrastructure relies on interconnected telecom networks. Congress has specifically directed the Commission to protect the national defense and the safety of life and property. It's in our statute. And that's why as we move into a 5G world, we must recognize the changing nature of our telecom network security needs. And as I've said before, network security is national security. And what are the stakes of that 5G security? I believe that they could not be higher. One of 5G's major advantages is its ability to connect far more devices than prior standards. Governments and business plans need to take advantage of that capability through the massive IoT projects that we know are going to come. And billions of devices will connect to 5G networks to handle communications governing our energy grid, our smart cities, our hospitals, our financial systems, and our transportation. And to its credit, 5G technology removes many of the vulnerabilities and increases the flexibility, security, and reliability of the network overall. And for example, segmenting operations using network slicing will allow carriers to contain attacks to a localized area and respond directly to affected operations. And shifting network functions to a software will allow carriers, of course, to prepare and deploy security updates more rapidly. But these networks are vulnerable. Networks are defined by their interconnection with other networks, of course, and that inherently creates risk. And as the telecom neighborhood has transformed from a small group of familiar carriers to a vast landscape of service providers, many of whom are strangers to each other. And this change has brought tremendous benefits to consumers in the form of new competition, new services, lower prices, but it's also rendered obsolete the historic presumption that we had that every interconnected party was a good faith actor with similar levels of security. Instead, we read of stories about bad actors, criminals, adversaries, and exploiting the gaps in our security systems to steal money, information, sabotage systems, or lay the groundwork for future misconduct. Many of you recall the 2017 NotPetya cyber attack, which our intelligence agencies tell us was launched by Russian state actors. And what began as an attack on Ukrainian banking and critical infrastructure interests quickly spread throughout the world, infecting and effectively rendering useless thousands of computers and networks and companies as diverse as FedEx, the shipping company Maersk, and the pharmaceutical giant Merck. Unlike many other cyber attacks, this one wasn't about money. It was simply no way to fix the problem. And this attack was designed to inflict as much pain as possible, as quickly as possible. And our government estimates that over $10 billion was damaged. Similar attacks are happening every day. Over the last couple of years, bad actors have staged ransomware attacks on cities across the country, including Los Angeles, Newark, San Diego, Atlanta, and Baltimore. Hackers have locked out city employees from their basic services and their systems, court systems, transportation databases, libraries, public safety operations. Just in the last month, we read about how 22 Texas cities and towns suffered coordinated ransomware attacks that locked the employees out of their email, computer, and phone system. These attacks forced officials to make the terrible choice between paying a ransom to get their data back and encouraging future attacks with tremendous costs and delay of rebuilding their networks from scratch. And while these are examples of hackers targeting software vulnerabilities in company or government networks, similar threats exist in our telecommunication networks. Intelligence agencies are, of course, concerned about China, which has a track record of using espionage to advance commercial and national security interests. And earlier this year, I joined my colleagues in rejecting an application from China Mobile to operate in the United States. And while China Mobile is not officially a state-controlled company, key executive branch agencies, in particular known as Team Telecom, for those that are familiar, convincingly advised the FCC, argued to the FCC that the company could be subject to undue influence by Chinese intelligence services. This would present a major threat to our national security because if its application had been approved, China Mobile would have been able to connect to the U.S. telecom network and gain access to our telephone lines, fiber optic cable, cellular networks, and communications satellites. And in fact, if it had offered the least costly path to carry traffic on any particular route, China Mobile could have even carried the communications of U.S. government agencies. The Commission is now reviewing the existing authorizations of 2 other Chinese telecom carriers. And I wholeheartedly agree with a letter that the chairman received just yesterday on a bipartisan basis from Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Chuck Schumer, that we need to figure out whether these 2 companies present the same type of threat, and more importantly, that we need to act soon. Nor are these types of concerns limited distinctly to carriers. A recent Wall Street Journal article reported on discussions within Team Telecom regarding applications pending before the FCC for an undersea cable project to connect Los Angeles to Hong Kong. And this project, which is backed by a number of U.S. companies and China's 4th largest telecom provider, could end up carrying a large portion of the U.S. Communications between the U.S. and Asia. And according to the story, again in the Wall Street Journal, the Justice Department is worried that communications over the undersea cable could be stolen, blocked, modified on its Hong Kong end, and is consulting with other members of Team Telecom about their recommendations to the FCC. As the story notes, the project is still being reviewed. It's still pending before us at the FCC, but for my part, I am gathering information about that application. Will decide my position once I've assessed the relevant record, including the recommendation from Team Telecom, to determine whether the proposed outcome protects the national defense and protects life and property, the FCC's statutory obligations in this area. But you will be hearing more from me on this. Where there are national security issues raised with regard to our networks, I'm paying close attention and will be using my voice to make sure that we are protecting Americans. And the threat isn't just simply interconnection and untrustworthy parties. Because of the changing nature of telecom equipment, even trusted actors must have security problems that can compromise their interconnected networks. For example, most legacy networks contain large amounts of interconnected hardware, and we are rapidly moving to an era where software will perform many of the functions that can be used by these devices. And this will increase the speed and flexibility of our networks, but will also create new openings for bad actors. And even if the software is installed properly, security patches could create ongoing new vulnerabilities in areas that were otherwise previously thought safe. And that is what's up behind the uproar that we hear from certain Chinese manufacturers, including Huawei and ZTE. Huawei in particular is one of the biggest telecom equipment manufacturers in the world. And although its share of U.S. telecom market is relatively small, some wireless carriers, of course, have purchased Huawei for their networks. And these carriers bought this equipment, let me be clear, often more than a decade or more ago, and it was far less expensive than other options, and Huawei was willing to work with them with outstanding service, I understand, to create customized networks. And these purchases did not violate any rules or laws. And notwithstanding these facts, experts say that the equipment made by Huawei and other Chinese manufacturers present security vulnerabilities. That's the assessment that the national security folks tell me right now. Huawei software does not have the same consistency from installation as its competitors, and programming variations make it difficult or impossible even for Huawei to exactly know what software is deployed in a given build and whether the equipment will accept certain software updates. This is the bugginess that national security experts advise me on Huawei software, which means that it has front doors accessible to both the company and bad actors familiar with exploiting inconsistencies and flaws in Huawei's code. And moreover, it's not just the original software that's concerning. Huawei systems are managed remotely from updates that are delivered from China. And many network and network components get software updates as frequently as every week, and we know that this is going to be part of the patchwork going forward. It's because of concerns like this that the federal government as a whole is concerned and seeking to stop the importation and installation of insecure Chinese equipment. This is coming from the president. This is coming from national security folks. This is coming from Congress. The Commission is currently examining whether to ban the use of federal support dollars to purchase such equipment, and we can't ignore the equipment that is already here, already in infrastructure. And that's why I've launched my own effort to understand and address this issue. I refer to my program as Find It, Fix It, and Fund It. And this summer, I conducted a workshop where I heard from a number of you here today, heard from carriers, heard from academics, heard from security experts, heard from equipment manufacturers. And this listening session, which included CCA's own staff, were incredibly helpful in providing context to the issue of informing my approach. A few brief lessons that I learned. The first part of the program is to find suspect equipment. Carriers told me that they're worried about being labeled as a security threat, particularly when they have acted, as I said, in good faith. And the Commission needs to consider the mix of incentives and regulatory action to identify where this equipment lies. And in the short term, we could provide financial incentives for the carriers to self-identify. And our ultimate goal of securing the nation's networks may require us to direct carriers to disclose this information. Fixing the security problem is the second part. Panelists at the workshop noted that for a fix, first needs to define the solution and get our heads around the problem. Do we need to remove all suspect equipment with a rip and replace approach, or can we somehow quarantine some equipment in certain parts of the network? I'm open to considering mitigation measures as an initial approach, but a long-term security of our networks will likely require some type of remediation for all equipment from suspect manufacturers. We know that at my workshop, Nokia and Ericsson indicated that they're willing to create products and financing options geared towards the smaller carriers that you guys represent. They also claim that they've handled similar replacement efforts with minimal disruption. And while I appreciate those efforts, and I also think that there is a real security need for U.S. innovation in this space, and I've called for that going forward. Last week, I published an op-ed in the San Jose Mercury News advocating the use and development of domestic products like software-enabled virtualized 5G infrastructure to replace some of this insecure equipment. America has long been a leader in technology and software and wireless technology and growing our capability to make sure secure infrastructure makes sense from a security and economic standpoint. We need to, as Americans, invest in research and development to continue to lead in this area and not have to rely on foreign manufacturers. The final part of the program may be the most essential, and that is the funding aspect of equipment replacement. This is a national problem, requires a national solution. And we shouldn't expect small carriers who acted legally and in good faith to replace insecure equipment on their own. And as I've heard from carriers at the workshop and even earlier today, many of the carriers who purchase this equipment operate on tight margins in rural areas and may not be able to cover the costs of replacement. And so just moments ago, like I mentioned, I did meet with a number of executives here from CCA and from their membership directly on these issues. The two things that I heard most distinctly were the need for certainty and the need for us on the federal government to drive a resolution. And I hear you. You should know that as a commissioner, something that I believe deeply in, of course, is process and input. And so I, both at my workshop in June as well as today, am eager to hear directly from you on the issues that you're facing, in particular with regard to insecure equipment. As a government official, I think folks are not entitled to a specific result, but frequently it is imperative that we have your input as decisions are getting made. Ultimately, I think this will be a problem that is also going to require congressional action. We know that the 5G Leadership Act is pending right now in the Senate. The costs also depend on the speed of the program. If we stretch out the timeline for replacement of insecure equipment, we could save millions as equipment simply ages out of service. I heard this earlier today as well. And we must weigh these potential savings against the possible risk to our national security while this equipment remains in place. And any funding should require recipients to observe good cybersecurity practices in the future. The entire federal government is working on this issue, needs to continue to work on this issue, and see that it gets done right. Finally, as noted earlier, next generation networks will continue and will connect billions of IoT devices. Each of these devices could be an entry point for a hostile actor to attack our networks. We know of the infamous Mariah attack in 2016, where hackers exploited vulnerabilities in multiple interconnected devices like surveillance cameras, DVRs, and a coordinated DDoS attack on web hosting services of providers and journalists. The attack didn't even require that much sophistication. The hackers used simple tools that were widely available on the internet. And while industry has done some good in this area, the federal government has yet to establish minimum cybersecurity standards for IoT devices. And as a result, devices made by well-known manufacturers may comply with these best practices, but many more devices from other companies may have fewer cybersecurity protections. And Congress has expressed bipartisan support for our action here, yet no legislation has been passed, and the FCC needs to step into the void. We are already examining and certifying devices for compliance with our interference standards, and we should work with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to develop cybersecurity standards and apply them in that certification review. Once we've done so, we should work with Customs and Border Protection to prevent equipment that doesn't comply with those standards from coming into our country. The next generation of wireless service will bring advances that we can't even yet imagine. And the Commission has an integral and important role to play in terms of ensuring that all Americans can take advantage of these opportunities. But we must couple our enthusiasm for these services with new services and a commitment to securing our networks. Only then will we have fully achieved a 5G victory for the American people. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to continuing to work with you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Again, thank you, Commissioner Starks. Thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts. But also, thank you most for your willingness to listen and engage with our members. And I think you can see from his presentation, he truly has a soft spot for rural America and how we continue our process there. Now, let me, okay, we got it? Okay, let me get